to see so much attendance. The very first workshop of Accountability Without Borders. This presentation is on social movements in Iran and the parallels with Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. I'm Anna, I'm from the Feminist Wave in Eindhoven, and I'll guide you through this afternoon. First of all, I wanted to say a big thank you to Valave to sharing this space with us, and also a big thank you to the group behind Accountability Without Borders. This is the very first session, and the idea is to have more of these presentations combined with discussion and create room for coping with despair around growing imperialism around the world. This is really focusing on, well, basically the lack of accountability for states like Israel and the US when it comes to Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. I'll wait for 1 second. We have one more guest. Some things here. Perfect. Yeah, okay. I'll continue. So this group of conversation is really to discuss the increasing imperialism and then also how this connects with us. So right-wing populism is on the rise, the militarization of our economy and education, state surveillance, increased fear and increase of war, climate change, pollution, and the biodiversity loss. Just to give you an idea of who's behind this group, I would like the group behind Accountability Without Borders to quickly stand up, just so you know who's organizing this and maybe can, if you have questions later on, you know whom to address in the room. So we have here the group. So really, honestly, big thank you for bringing this to Eindhoven. These conversations. Thanks. Just to understand a bit this afternoon, the presentations are recorded for the archive. The discussion afterwards will not be recorded, so you can feel free to say whatever you want without any fear of ending up on the internet. From the Accountability Without Borders.
Maybe we will put it online, but we don't have a platform yet. We don't know.
Yeah, but the discussion is not recorded.
Okay.
Yeah. The conversations really focus on policies. So we're trying to, we really want to stay not racist, no anti-Semitism, no Islamophobia, no homophobia, and really no ideology that is based on supposed superiority. So we have two speakers today. Yasmin Mother will give a presentation over 20 minutes. We will have a short break for clarifying questions. So really, this is supposed to be short, and then a second presentation from Imran Genji. Again, short clarifying questions. Then the recording will stop, and we will move on to a discussion of about 45 minutes. Before we get started, I also want to just acknowledge this historic date that we're about to have. On 16 September 2022, Gina Mahsa Amini was killed in Iran, which led to the rise and start of the Women's Life Freedom Movement, which I'm sure we will hear more about in the next presentations, but I just want to remember this state. With that, later, yeah. With that, I'll move on to our first speaker. Yasmin Mother is an Iranian-British scholar and political activist. She's a scientific developer, advanced research computing at the University of Oxford, UK. And she will join us online and give a presentation from the UK. She's also an acting editor of the independent scholar journal Critique, Journal of Socialist Theory. And I'm very happy to hear her first presentation of this role. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm especially grateful to the Iranian friends who have suggested that I could speak. I wished I could be there with you. I'm sorry I can't. Work does not allow it. I will try and talk about all the struggles you mentioned, emphasizing that this is not against any race, any gender. It is about political events, and in particular, the state of Israel and its wars in the region, and the state of Iran and its attacks on ordinary civilians. I don't think we can talk about the current situation in my region without referring to the genocide in Gaza, the mass killing, the famine, but also the complicity of US leaders, European leaders, the complicity of many governments throughout the world at a time when the majority of the population in most of those countries, including Britain, France, Germany, I assume the Netherlands, everywhere, is opposed to this genocide. And from artists, from writers, from poets, everyone expresses their opposition to what is going on. And
yes,
yet,
sorry,
yeah.
Is it possible that you come a bit closer to the phone, because we have the maximum of our sound, but we don't hear you very well.
Okay, I will increase the audio. Sorry. Is that better?
Yeah, really very bad one.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so in order to frame this within this world situation, what we are looking at, the world situation and the current genocide going on, it is unique. Since the Second World War, we haven't had an event like this, and yet it looks like nothing can be done. I'm also aware that the BRICS countries, for example, are not really doing much about the situation. We are also dealing with a situation where there is no longer, I never believed in claims of many European states that they were concerned about human rights, but now there is not even any claim for that. So we have a US president who openly says he doesn't care about human rights in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, anywhere. So we are in a unique world situation in some ways because of that. Yet none of this should make us forget about what is going on in the region. In some ways, the inability of countries such as Iran, who claim and at times do support Palestine, to do anything, the dead ends they are facing, the dead end situation they are facing, having lost their allies, having lost their supporters in terms of Syria, Hezbollah, and so on, is that they don't have their own population with them. So they have a country where there is a lot of sanctions. Yes, that has caused economic problems, but the opposition to the rulers is not just because sanctions have made the economic situation terrible. It's because of corruption. It is because of the neoliberal economic policies that these people follow. Inflation is unbelievably high, partly because of sanctions, but there are other reasons. There are unpaid wages, collapsing services. The 12-day war has left a devastating situation in that quite a lot of the services, basic system services, have collapsed. And yet there is continued strikes and protests by workers, by social groups, by women. And all of these protests, in some way, were a bit overshadowed during the 12-day war, where Israel attacked militarily Iran, but it doesn't mean they have gone away. And in this, I want to relate this to the events that you talked about. But before that, I think we have to remember that the reason Iran is in this current situation is the memories of the 1979 revolution, the fact that workers, this is a left-wing meeting in Iran in early 1980s. So you can see that Iran wasn't always what it is today. But the traditions of militant struggle did persist and have persisted. That brings me to the events that we do want to commemorate, the 16th of September, as mentioned earlier, the Women, Life, Freedom uprising. And it sparked because of the murder of Mahsa Jina Amini, but it went well beyond hijab. It became an opposition against class oppression, against gender oppression. And working class women were central to this protest because in the posher, more expensive, richer areas of Tehran and some of the major cities, the issue of hijab wasn't important. It was much more important in working class areas. I've put the picture of the two reporters who broke the story and therefore went to prison. And when they came out of prison, they were actually both wearing the Palestinian kafia. And it very well links what is genuine opposition to genocide in Gaza by Iranians who also defend the struggles of Mahsa Amini. So it's not I couldn't find the picture where they were both wearing the kafia, but I think it depicts well where we are with this. The events, the arrest of and the subsequent death of Mahsa Amini led to a number of arrests, large numbers. There were some executions. There is still executions of people who were arrested in the demonstrations. Last week, we saw two of such executions. A lot of people were shot at. There was opposition not just to the fact that the state was being oppressive, but also that the states that claimed support for other oppressed people was dealing internally in such a terrible manner. And therefore, I don't think the struggle that started in September 2022 has finished. It's continuing. It is part and parcel of everyday life in Iran, as much as the fact that war and the Israeli attack against Iran affected it. However, we do need to learn from the lessons and the mistakes of that period. There were those who were saying, oh, this is just for Iranian women. Let's not bring class. Let's not talk about imperialism. Let's not talk about Israel. Let's not talk about the United States. Let's unite everyone. Well, this led to opportunistic appropriations of the Gina Massa Amini struggle, the life, women, freedom struggle. Meghan Markle, the ex-princess in UK, is wearing a T-shirt with that slogan. Joe Biden and his wife, Jill Biden, who is complicit in the genocide. As you know, many young Americans use the slogan Genocide Joe. But there he is in, I think, 2023, celebrating Iranian women, life, woman, freedom with his wife. We have to learn from those three lessons. Why? Because unless we do so, people like Netanyahu, people like Joe Biden, abuse the struggle of Iranian women, as Bush did in 2003, 2001, abuse the struggles of women to justify militarist attack, to justify imperialist aggression, to justify the kind of events that is going on in Gaza, because it's so easy to fall into this Islamophobic aspect of, oh, let us liberate women of Iran, let us liberate women in Syria. Well, in Syria, for all it felt, the dictator Assad was leaving women alone. He was a dictator, he was a terrible person, but in terms of women, their struggles have started quite clearly since HTS came to power, because they now have to, exactly like women in Iran, struggle against headscarves, forced hijab, the fact that women can't go to many places on their own, they have to be accompanied by men. In Lebanon, the situation is more complicated in that Hezbollah has a very pragmatic approach to such situation, and Lebanon is a multicultural, multi-religious country, and so that has different aspects to it. But in all of these struggles, if we separate the internal issue from the regional problems, from war, and right now from genocide, then we are not doing any service to that movement. In fact, we are paving the way for the defeat of it. The women's struggles in Iran are very significant. Not when we say we have to look at this as class struggles, some people say, oh, you mean you only support women workers? No, factory work has changed globally, and it has changed in Iran as well. So there's very few factories right now operational anyway because of sanctions, because of economic collapse. There is no electricity, all sorts of other problems. When we are talking of women's struggles as class struggles, we are talking of nurses, we are talking of teachers, we are talking of cleaners, care workers, women who work from home. Quite a lot of women, even before COVID, worked from home in Iran because it was cheaper and their families allowed this. So they produced garments and sold it, and there was agencies that sold it. So the double burden of patriarchy and capitalism was really crushing down Iranian women. The photo you see is nurses in Iran. It's about 2024, if I'm not mistaken, but they've been on strike on a number of occasions. And the linking of these struggles to anti-imperialist struggles is, in my opinion, very important. Because for a country to be anti-imperialist, for a country to be able to confront aggression by Israel, by US, it must have its own population with it. It can't do so when it's constantly dealing with two fronts. One, its internal front, where opposition is genuine and is not, contrary to what some governments, including the Iranian government, say, is not fueled by outside, but it is part of the day-to-day struggle. When we are looking at Syria, Lebanon, Iran, Gaza, we have to see that this is not so much related about a particular issue like Hamas being the biggest danger ever, or Iran's nuclear weapons, or Assad being a dictator. The European countries, the US, has tolerated far worse dictators than Assad dictator. the nuclear issue is just, in my opinion, an excuse. Israel has many nuclear weapons. No one is challenging it. What is at issue is creating a very strong strategic base for US and for the West in the region. And in this, both the European countries, but also the United States, don't care about the destructions that will follow it. So you have destruction of Iran, you have destruction in Gaza, you have in Lebanon the use of these pages that blew up in people's hands. Now, they could have been a supporter of Hezbollah. They might have not been, not everyone in Hezbollah was a military member of Hezbollah. And yet we had thousands who were injured because of that. And for ordinary people in all of these countries, the problem is this dual repression that is challenging, is difficult to tolerate, and creates extremely dangerous situations. So looking at Iran, and I would generalize it for others as well, you can't have this false choice that you either have to support the Islamic Republic or you're with imperialism, which seems to be the normal actions of sections, at least, of the Iranian opposition and the left opposition in Iran. You can be opposing both of these. And I'm not equating the Islamic Republic with imperialist powers here, because clearly the US has a huge military arsenal. Israel has a much stronger military situation. The picture in the last photo I showed the buildings where nuclear physicists lived, some of whom had left their jobs as they were too old, they were retired members, physicists, and yet the building was destroyed. So you don't have none of these countries are in a position to militarily confront imperialism. But if the dictatorship is overthrown, if the neoliberal economic policies that makes countries such as Iran, such as Lebanon, such as Syria, followers of the diktat of global capital that tells them you have to reduce salaries, you have to get rid of subsidies, you have to lower wages, contract work is better because people can't strike, can't oppose you, then you have if you can overthrow those states that are doing this, then those countries can be genuinely anti-imperialist. And I think the feeling now in Global South, the feeling now in most of the ordinary people who are opposed to the inhumane conditions that the Palestinians face, the threat of wars that exist now against Iran, because all Iranians are aware that as soon as the Gaza situation is resolved a bit as far as Trump is concerned and Netanyahu, which means moving large numbers either to these concentration camps or forcing them to leave, there will be another war with Iran. And in this, it's workers, women who face the worst situation. The economic sanctions against Iran made women's poverty far more of an issue. But also it is women who, for example, have to queue for hours in order to get food that is unavailable because of sanctions. So in all of this, when we are fighting, we are anti-war, but we can't be just pacifist about it. I think in the European countries, in the US, we have to call for the defeat of the countries that are creating such disaster, US, Israel, the European Union. But we can and should also be opposed to dictatorships in these countries. And we have seen signs of this. I was very impressed by the students in Oxford last year who took over parts of the university and supported Gaza, they are aware that their institutions, their universities, the finances of these places benefit from war, because companies that are investing, research that is done is helping these war efforts. We do see global solidarity in dock workers who are blocking arms shipments to Israel. So there are signs of these movements. We should strengthen them. We should be with them. However ineffective it seems in terms of a local action, their united collective action does make a difference. And it is in this that for all the darkness around us, for all the barbarisms that is around us, I still see the possibilities of a new internationalism that will confront all of this and unite the global South. So in concluding this, I would argue that opposing the current lack of human rights, the opposing genocide, requires the intervention of workers, women, and oppressed people against imperialism, against capitalism, but against authoritarianism in their own countries. And it does require a new form of internationalism beyond political sectarian internationalism, one that genuinely unites the students, workers, women in the West, in European countries, with global South. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yasmin. Very, very nice presentation. We have time for like 2 clarifying questions, if there are any. So please let me know if there's anything you would like to ask Yasmin right now. Otherwise, we continue with the next speaker.
There's one thing. I don't understand what's in Dutch.
Saskia?
Ja, mag in Nederlands, ja.
En
Wat is de vraag?
in Dutch?
What is the Dutch term for imperialism? The Dutch term would be imperialisme. Het heeft te maken met dat je je rijk wilt uitbreiden en dat je dus andere gronden wilt overpakken. En er zit een hele structuur onder.
Yeah, one more here.
Early on, there was a question about the BRIC, or a comment about the BRICS countries. I imagine there might be some people who don't know what those are.
Sure. BRICS is the combination of Brazil, Russia, Iran, India, and China and South Africa. Yeah, I think the community is much larger by now, but those were the original community.
That's South Africa.
South Africa is?
Speaking out
Yes, yeah, they are. South Africa is speaking out against genocide. We have a question from online.
Yes. User Natalie, which is online right now, asks, how do you look at Qatar involvement and the bombing that happened lately?
I'm sorry, is it possible for someone to repeat the questions? The audience audio is very weak for me, sorry.
Yeah, the Shouter Natalie asks, how does this relate to the, how does this involve the current, or the latest attack to Qatar? Sorry.
I don't know if the name. Were you going to address it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, how do you look at Qatar involvement in the bombing that happened lately?
Shall I reply?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. I think it's very significant in that the Arab countries had some of these countries, including Qatar, UAE in particular, have secret relations with Israel. And in some ways, if I understand it correctly, the Hamas leadership were in discussion with US about a peace deal when they were bombed, or the place where they were staying was bombed, which is a repetition of Witkoff talking to Iran's foreign minister and arranging a meeting for the Saturday Israel attack. Now, it's very difficult to judge whether this is, if you like, Israel preempting these attacks in order to stop the deals going through, or is the US complicit in this? I have no crystal ball to tell you that. But in both circumstances, it breaks any trust. So the Iranian government might be reactionary, but it also is trying to deal with all of this. So it had put its trust in the talks. Qatar had put its trust, and Hamas had put its trust in these talks, and then they were bombed. But more importantly, I think it marks the end of the Abraham Accord. It marks the end of maybe today's, I understand there is a meeting in Doha of various Arab Islamic countries. It might mean a reduction of the kind of secret deals that Saudi Arabia and UAE were doing with Israel, because now they realize that they can be bombed as well. So in some ways, it's a constant escalation of what might be a plan for a greater Israel. I think both Trump and the Israeli government have this ambition of a very, not that Israel takes over all of these countries, but it's a very powerful country that controls parts of Syria, is secure in terms of Lebanon, and then has scared the Persian Gulf countries to the level where they will not confront it. So all this would work in such a plan.
Okay, thank you. I think that was a very good answer. We will continue with the next speaker. So we have Iman Ganji here in the room. Of course, yeah. Yeah.
Is this before one last question?
Can we leave it for the discussion, maybe? Yeah. Okay. So Iman is an Iranian-German writer, journalist, and scholar. He has his PhD in performance and theater studies from the Freie Universität Berlin. And between 2004 and 2012, he lived in Tehran and worked there as a translator, writer, and activist. And until last year, he was the chief editor of Zamaneh, hope I said it right, the independent medium in Farsi. And with that, I think we're ready to go to the second presentation. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you for being here. I just having some technical difficulty with that. Yeah.
What are you doing? It's already here.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to.
Oh my God. What do you want? The next slide?
Yes, but it's
okay.
like
Okay.
it's frozen.
Why?
Sorry.
I did not expect this. Oh. I think just have to restart PowerPoint, right?
Yeah.
So what? Why?
There's another view for the presentation itself.
Doesn't.
maybe check if
No,
there's
but you need
results.
this one.
Oh,
You need to
right.
do this, right?
Okay, with
To
this.
scroll.
Okay.
Yeah?
Perfect. Thank
It
you.
just works.
Okay, so before I start my presentation, I should also recognize that our most urgent cause today should be stopping the genocide in Gaza and the takeover of the rest of Palestine. Thousands have been killed, tens of thousands have been killed, hundreds of thousands are facing famine, and tragically the whole international order, Western powers, Russia, China, they are doing nothing. So this is a dark and powerless time, unfortunately. And we have watched the live streamed genocide for nearly 2 years. So with that acknowledged, I now turn to the main subject of my presentation. So I want to begin with two images. One, today marks the anniversary of the Jina uprising of September 2022, which changed Iran, the longest and largest revolt since the 1979 revolution, left a profound mark on Iranian society and the socio-political system, even if it did not bring about a change in the state or political power itself. Picture this: in a country where hijab and gender segregation in public space were enforced by law and by police, women walked unveiled in front of riot police, refusing to recognize their authority. They danced in the streets, burned their headscarf, and a student tore down physical barriers separating male and female students. To grasp the seriousness with which protesters took to the streets, recall the George Floyd protests that captured the global imagination. Compared to them, what happened in Iran was like this. Imagine the burning down of the third person in Minneapolis in response to the murder of Floyd, but happening in every major city in all 50 states and sustained for an entire month. The second picture on October 7, 2024, one year after the Hamas attack, and in the midst of Israel's genocide in Gaza, an Iranian journalist working for the pro-Israeli outlet Iran International shared a shocking video on the top left, but I didn't bring the video here. He had written "Woman, Life, Freedom" on the walls of North Gaza rooms before returning to Tel Aviv. Before and after that, Israeli pilots bombing Iran were celebrated on social media under the hashtag Woman, Life, Freedom, with Netanyahu starting the bombing campaign in the so-called 12 days war with the same slogan. So what happened between these two images? I start again with Jina uprising. Jina uprising was described as a leaderless movement because of the refusal to recognize any top-down patriarchal authority during the movement, unlike the mainstream culture of politics in Iran. While this description was reductive, it reflects an important aspect of the uprising. During the uprising, local forms of leadership, organization, and collectivity emerged across the country. If we must use the language of leadership, it was this process of collective self-organization and mass pedagogy that guided the movement. This so-called leaderlessness testifies to the character of the revolutionary uprising. It was no longer a revolution seeking to occupy centralized seats of power or simply replace one head with another. It was first and foremost an attempt to dissolve the social relations of Iranian society that have persisted up to the present, while creating alternative relations in their place. As Marx says, capital is a social relation between persons, which is mediated through things. A new social relation in Iran could construct an alternative future. But to have an alternative future, you must have a radical imagination of that future. That future cannot be somewhere else, cannot be a future that is like already being experienced somewhere else. And also you should bring the potentialities of the past into the present to fight for that future. The Jinn uprising drew upon the unrealized potentials of Iran's anti-monarchical revolution of 1979, the women's movement spanning over 4 decades, and the Kurdish women's struggle against double oppression. These movements contributed to the uprising's power to reorder time, to reassign new meanings to the past, present, and future. However, for a part of the so-called opposition, there existed a fully determined and actualized mythical, glorious past before the revolution to return to, and a fully actualized disastrous past and present, which is the current Iran to escape from, toward the future that already exists somewhere else in European countries, the United States, Canada, or even South Korea. While revolutionary movements attempt to construct alternative imaginaries, reactionary forces appropriate their symbols for counter-revolutionary ends. Western mainstream media and parts of Iran's opposition, the far-right opposition basically, represent the Jinn uprising through aesthetic contradiction. Aesthetic contradictions freeze the uprising between binaries such as West, East, liberal democracy, monocracy, market freedom, iron fist. In this aesthetic image, the uprising lacks a singular past or an alternative future. Instead, its future is assimilating into the global norms and is presented as a return to a mythical, glorious past. This reactionary propaganda reproduces images of Iranian women for Western media consumption, hollowing out the movement's anti-capitalist and anti-colonial potentialities that could make it resistant to absorption by dominant imperialist forces. Dilar Dirik, a Kurdish feminist scholar who has written and spoken about the Jinn uprising, explains it this way. Soon after the government murder of Jinnah, a decades-old slogan of the revolutionary Kurdish women's movement, Jinjian Azadi, chanted during her funeral, traveled around the world. Very quickly, however, these words, a product of the resistance experience of thousands of terror labor guerrillas, political prisoners, and revolutionary organizers, many of whom had died in the fight against the second largest NATO army, which is Turkey, were used as a decoy in the hands of Persian monarchists, other elites, and NATO states and regional allies, who could not care less about the struggles of ordinary people, but pursue as elsewhere strategies of regime change at all costs, even gambling with the collapse of countries, civil war, and regional chaos. The flagrant emptying of the anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, and anti-systemic philosophy and collective practice embedded in the slogan's legacy was deliberately crafted and directed on an international scale. Some of the Euro-American establishment figures who shed crocodile tears for women in Iran are among the fiercest backers of Israel's genocide, which is also a femicidal one. The mainstream media's appropriation of Iranian women's bodies and struggles invokes Sarah Faris' concept of femonationalism. This term captures the trend where nationalist ideologies co-opt specific feminist issues to advance xenophobic and anti-immigration agendas. Through the lens of femonationalism, non-Western women, especially those from the Western Asia and Northern Africa, are portrayed as victims of the patriarchy inherent in their cultures, needing liberation from outside, specifically from Western culture and government. Regarding Iran and the Jinn uprising, femonationalist barbarism appears most clearly in Israel's appropriation of the slogan that we talked in the beginning. So from here, I go to the war that Israel waged against Iran and also later to Gaza. So political events break history into before and after. They also divide groups, individuals, forcing them to take sides. October 7, 2023 is such an event for the Western Asia. It deepened divisions inside the left, which was already weak and fragmented. The event raises urgent questions about left internationalism in the region and about Islam's role in politics, questions tied to struggles over self-determination, race, gender, imperialism, and political subjects. But my focus is on Iran here. Today, two dominant forces shape Iran's context: anti-leftism and Islamophobia. The ultra-right opposition in Iran has long spoken of a red-black alliance, depicting leftists and Islamists as the twin architects of the 1979 revolution, an unforgivable sin in their view, along with everything that followed inside the country. For decades, this was a marginal narrative. Today, it has become mainstream, even though its claims are absolute nonsense, disregarding the fact that one side of this alleged alliance has massacred the members of the other one in prisons in the summer of 1988. Criticism of Israel, United States, opposition to Pahlavism, Pahlavi is the name of the deposed monarch, defense of LGBTQ rights, feminism, all are increasingly dismissed as the machinations of one wing or both wings of this imagined red-black conspiracy. The current situation differs profoundly from that of the 1970s and 1980s, both in terms of support for Palestine among Iranian political forces and within society at large. One particularly revealing example is the trajectory of the Mujahideen Khalq, once a leftist anti-imperialist militant organization that fought actively in Palestine and Lebanon. It has since the early 2000s collaborated with Mossad and even reportedly took part on the ground in the offensive this past June. The Red-Black Alliance discourse, propagated by the supporters of the disposed monarch Pahlavi that sat on the throne after the occupation of Iran in World War II, and saved a second time by the US-British coup against Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953, has of course all the hallmarks of US imperialist propaganda, hitting two separate targets, communism and Islam, with one stone. If you followed coverage of the recent assassination of the fascist figure in the United States, you've likely heard Netanyahu and Trump-aligned media pundits invoke the phrase unholy alliance of Marxists and Islamists. For decades, the Iranian state has been depicted as a medieval clique of reactionary mullahs, an entity utterly antithetical to the so-called Western values of freedom and human rights, and to the models of its governance. Yet paradoxically, when the West confronts this archaic force, it resorts precisely to sanctions as a punitive mechanism, implying an inherently dependent upon Iran's integration into global capitalism and the structures of international finance. The latest example was a week ago, as the three European powers asserted the restoration of the United Nations sanctions against Tehran. Thus, the Islamic Republic emerges in imperialist rhetoric as both pre-modern outlier and capitalist participant, a contradiction obscured by narratives of civilizational antagonism. This duality is starkly evident in the depiction of political Islam represented by the Islamic Republic, portrayed consistently as embodiment of barbarism locked in eternal opposition to civilization, defined invariably as the West. Netanyahu has articulated this trope repeatedly and explicitly. In October 2024, responding to the performative hesitations of Western officials such as Macron over potential arms embargoes against Israel, Netanyahu issued a rhetorical admonishment. As Israel fights the forces of barbarism led by Iran, all civilized countries should be standing firmly by Israel's side. Later, when initiating the war against Iran, Netanyahu amplified this discourse through American media appearances from an undisclosed location, framing the conflict in moralistic and civilizational terms. It's a larger battle. It's a battle of civilization against barbarism. Today it is Tel Aviv, tomorrow it is New York. It's a battle of good against evil. However, he extended the imperialist trope of liberation, claiming the war aimed to bring freedom to the people of Iran who are suffering. Despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, Netanyahu repeatedly insisted we are not bombing the population. With this rhetorical sleight of hand, the West's historic civilizing mission is resurrected anew, cloaking imperial violence in benevolent language, while systematically erasing its victims from the view. This in itself is far from novel. As early as 1996, Edward Said wrote of the very same phenomenon, one that could describe our current moment almost exactly if one were simply to replace the phrase peace of the brave with its newer Trumpian iteration, peace through strength. Cynical manipulations of religion are appalling, wrote Said, but there has been little more obdurate and arrogant than the Israeli and American response with its sanctimonious choruses against terrorism, Hamas, Islamic fundamentalism, and its equally odious hymns to peacemaking, the peace process, and the peace of the brave. Seeing through the emerging discourse around Iran, precisely the one we're facing now, Said identified its deeper structure. What has made the events of the past few weeks even more dreadful is that Israel and the United States, deliberately using the weapons of mass media, psychological warfare, and political pressure, have also been leading a campaign against Islam with Iran as its main target, as the origin of terror and fundamentalism. He understood this as a Cold War logic transposed onto a new ideological train, a continuation of enemy manufacturing now firmly settled on Islam as the manufactured opponent. In the Jewish state, Theodor Herzl declared of the future Israeli state, we should there form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. That colonial vision was not just a relic of the 19th century. It resurfaced unmistakably after Israel's attack on Iran, when Netanyahu echoed the same logic and Western officials followed suit. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz even admitted this is the dirty work that Israel is doing for all of us, revealing how Herzl's civilizational rhetoric continues to shape imperial discourse today. What Israel has launched in Iran has been the war of the United Western Imperialist Bloc against another country with regime change as its explicit aim. We must without hesitation recognize the initiator of this aggression. The very same people who shamelessly blamed Hamas for genocide in Gaza now claim that the government in Tehran is itself responsible for the savage assaults on Iran. The engineered civil war that ensures no authority on the territory called Iran can reveal itself for the foreseeable future. A large country with vast resources, regardless of its conventional or unconventional weaponry, poses a threat to Israel's absolute hegemony, and by extension that of Western imperialism in the region. Any power that consolidates itself independently of imperialism within even part of this territory presents that same threat. In such a scenario, for the foreseeable future, the right to self-determination will not be realized for any of Iranian peoples in any of part of its geography. Should the scenario of permanent civil war materialize, it will mean the end of all liberation movements in the region for the foreseeable future. Moreover, Israel will be free to formally annex the West Bank and after completing genocide and ethnic cleansing, to bring Gaza entirely under its control. The West Bank has already been placed under siege since the very first day of Israel's war against Iran. This is not without precedent. In 1950s and 60s, Israel, citing conflicts with Arab states, repeatedly blockaded the West Bank, preparing for annexation. In the end, it opted for military occupation, turning the West Bank into what it calls a non-annexed territory. The only reason it has stopped short of formal annexation then was pressure from both the United States and the Soviet Union. That pressure does not exist today. Benjamin Netanyahu's rhetoric attempting to justify genocide in Gaza and aggression against other countries that now includes Iran, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Qatar, by invoking words like freedom, humanity, rights, stability, and security, is saturated with references to modern Western values and humanism. This rhetoric since 90s served as the legitimizing framework for humanitarian military intervention. So the only principle that stands now is opposition to Western imperialist war against Iran, a position that demands the immediate cessation of this war by its instigator Israel, an end to genocide in Gaza, the lifting of the siege on the West Bank, and full accountability of the Israeli state and its allies. Thank you.